The FBI thought they were just detaining another suspect, until they realized it was Big Shaq. No charges, no explanation, just silence and cuffs. But one call to the police chief, and everything changed. The agents froze, the system cracked, and the truth came rushing in. Because when Big Shaq speaks, even the Bureau listens. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq, to just about everybody but his mama, woke up to the warm breath of Florida sunlight filtering through the blinds of his Clearwater home. The house sat quietly off the edge of a calm cul-de-sac, where kids rode their bikes like they had nothing but time and dogs barked at mailmen like clockwork. Shaq's mornings were slow on purpose. He liked it that way. Brew a strong cup of hazelnut coffee, call his mother Lucille just to hear her voice, and sit on the back porch where the wind stirred the trees like gospel in motion. He didn't feel like a celebrity here. Didn't need to. He was just Shaq, retired ball player, sometimes commentator, and full-time gentle giant. Clearwater, Florida, wasn't perfect, but it had space to breathe, especially when you made it a point to give back. By 10 a.m., Shaq was pulling up to the Heart Point Youth Center, a low brick building with bright murals painted by the kids themselves. His name was etched on the donation wall inside, but he never made a fuss. He wasn't there for headlines. He was there because he remembered what it felt like to be a black boy, without a lot of places that felt safe. Inside, laughter bounced off the gymnasium walls. A group of teens huddled near the basketball court, arguing over who could land a free throw from half court. When Shaq walked in, everything paused, then exploded into grins and cheers. "Big Shaq," one of the boys shouted, voice cracking mid-celebration. He grinned, opened his arms wide. "Y'all still trash at hooping, huh?" They rushed him, dozens of them, all elbows and joy. Some of the smaller kids tried to jump and touch his shoulders, laughing when they couldn't reach. For the next hour he gave out hugs, coached terrible layups, and handed out advice the way only Shaquille O'Neal could, real gentle, laced with humor. A girl named Zaria tugged his sleeve quietly during the chaos. "My brother got pulled over last night. They said his taillight was out, but they made him get on the ground." Shaq squatted down to her level. "He okay?" She nodded, eyes wide, scared. "They didn't even say sorry." He looked her dead in the eye. "That ain't right, and we gon' make sure people know it's not." Zuria's lip trembled, but she smiled and nodded. That was what Heart Point meant, being seen. By noon he was back in his Escalade, heading home. Windows down, R&B humming through the speakers. He wasn't thinking about the world much, just about stopping by Mama Lucille's later, maybe bringing her lemon cake from that place she loved off 7th. The day felt good, the kind of day you wanted to wrap up and tuck away for later. That's when he noticed them. 2 black SUVs. Unmarked, clean, discreet, but too quiet. First in the rear view, then hanging back at every turn. Not tailgating, but never falling behind. Shaq's brows furrowed. Not police, not press. Too quiet, too close. He took a longer route, looping around downtown. They stayed with him. He changed lanes. So did they. He pulled into a gas station, pretending to check his tires. They parked across the street. Shaq's jaw tightened. He reached for his phone, snapped a quick photo of the plates. Not standard Florida issue. Then he exhaled, slow and heavy. He wasn't going to panic. That wasn't him. He dealt with all kinds: fans, reporters, trolls. But something about this was off. He turned back onto the road, keeping calm, just trying to make it home. Then, without warning, the second SUV accelerated, cut him off just ahead of the intersection near Bayview and 12th. Lights flashed from behind, not red and blue, something dimmer, more sterile. Shaq braked to a halt, gripping the wheel. A voice came over the outside speaker. "Step out of the vehicle with your hands where we can see them." Shaq blinked. No sirens, no patrol cars, no uniforms. He cracked his window. "Can I ask what this is about?" No answer. Just repeated command. "Step out of the vehicle." People were starting to look. Cars slowed, phones raised. Shaq opened the door, stepped out slow. He stood tall, too tall to look like a threat, yet somehow too black to be safe in that moment. He saw the agents step forward, weapons holstered but hands twitching near their belts. No questions, no smiles, just stares. One of them held up a badge, barely. "Federal inquiry. Please place your hands behind your back." Shaq didn't move. Am I under arrest? You're being detained. For what? We'll explain at the station. He looked around. Cameras were out. People recording from their cars. He locked eyes with one woman across the street. She was crying. He slowly turned, placed his hands behind his back, and let them cuff him. They didn't read him his rights. Didn't mention a warrant. Didn't say anything else. Shaq didn't speak either. Not out of fear, but because he knew. This wasn't about evidence. This wasn't about crime. This was about being big, black and present in the wrong zip code at the wrong time. As they placed him into the back of the SUV, his eyes flicked toward the morning sun. Still bright, still warm, but now it felt far away, distant, like it belonged to someone else. And that's how it started. Just another day in Clearwater. But when you're Shaquille O'Neal, sometimes the world doesn't care who you are, only what you look like. What they didn't know was that this story was far from over. The interior of the unmarked SUV was sterile and silent. Shaq sat in the back seat, wrists cuffed, knees nearly touching the ceiling. Despite his size, he stayed perfectly still, his breathing slow and controlled. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand answers. He'd learned long ago that in moments like this, your dignity was your sharpest weapon. The two agents in the front said nothing as they drove. No formalities, no acknowledgement, not even eye contact in the mirror, just tension in the air, thick and stale like an old courtroom. Outside the sun still shined, but inside the vehicle, time slowed. Shaq thought of the kids back at Heartpoint. Zaria's voice echoed in his memory, telling him about her brother being forced to the ground. He hadn't realized how close that story would come to home, how quickly you could go from community pillar to coded threat in the eyes of the state. When they reached the Clearwater Federal Complex, there was no processing desk, no check-in, just a side entrance, a heavy steel door, and two agents who guided him into a plain white hallway, without saying a word. He noticed the small cameras tucked into the corners, watching, always watching. A short, stiff man in a gray suit met them just inside. He carried a leather folder under one arm, and a cold look in his eyes. Bring him to interview 3. No introductions, no charges, just directions. They walked him into a sterile room table, 2 chairs, single ceiling camera, and an air vent that hummed louder than anyone dared speak. The agents removed his cuffs, then left him sitting alone. He didn't pace, he didn't lean, he just folded his hands on the table and waited, his massive frame shrinking into stillness like a man who'd been here before. Minutes later, the door opened. 2 new agents entered. One tall with silver-rimmed glasses, the other younger, twitchy, nervously clutching a notepad. The older one, clearly in charge, sat across from Shaq and opened the folder. His tone was clipped, devoid of warmth. Mr. O'Neal, you're here voluntarily for questioning regarding financial irregularities tied to charitable contributions made over the last 18 months. Specifically those connected to the Heartpoint Youth Center, the New Roots Housing Initiative, and an organization known as Legacy Ladder. Specifically those connected to the Heartpoint Youth Center, the New Roots Housing Initiative, and an organization known as Legacy Ladder. Shaq raised an eyebrow. You dragged me off the street in handcuffs to talk about charity? The younger agent shifted uncomfortably. The lead agent ignored the comment. Are you aware, the man continued, that over $1.2 million in donations from your private foundation have been flagged for unusual routing? Money that ends up in shell accounts, off-books programs, and subcontracted vendors with no transparency. Shaq leaned back, slow and deliberate. I've been running that foundation for over 15 years. Everything goes through an audit firm, monthly. If there's something wrong, I'll have my legal team clarify it. That won't be necessary yet, the man replied, a hint of smugness in his voice. We're just asking questions. You didn't cuff me for questions, Shaq said evenly. You cuffed me for headlines. The younger agent looked like he wanted to disappear. His eyes kept drifting to Shaq's face, something like recognition starting to bloom. The lead agent pressed forward. There are concerns that your foundation is serving as a conduit for laundering operations under the guise of urban outreach, particularly programs focused on underserved Black communities. There it was. The words hung in the air, loaded and sharp. The implication wasn't even veiled. Underserved Black communities. The way he said it wasn't descriptive, it was accusatory. Like community work was inherently suspicious if it wasn't coming from the right kind of hands or skin. Shaq didn't flinch. You think I'm using charity to run a criminal enterprise? The man didn't answer directly. Our job is to investigate patterns. Shaq studied him. And what pattern does a retired basketball player funding reading programs fall under? Silence again. But the air shifted when the younger agent finally whispered, barely audible, "Sir, I think we need to pause." The lead agent shot him a glare. "What is it?" The younger man hesitated, then leaned in slightly. That's Shaquille O'Neal." The room froze. The older agent blinked once. "I know who he is." "Then maybe we proceed as instructed." The senior agent cut in, voice like gravel. "Public identity doesn't exempt anyone." Shaq leaned forward, voice calm but steel-edged. "You knew who I was when you picked me up. This ain't about money. This is about perception. A big black man moves money into black neighborhoods, and suddenly it's criminal." The older agent said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Shaq tapped the table gently. "You ever seen a playground go up on a corner where a liquor store used to be? You ever see what it looks like when kids who don't have nothing start getting hot lunches and mentors in computer labs? I ain't out here selling dreams. I'm buying futures, but maybe that scares some people." The younger agent looked down at his notepad, hands trembling. The older one stood abruptly. "We're done for now. You'll be held pending verification of financial records." Shaq gave a slow nod. "You ever wonder why you didn't read me my rights?" The man paused mid-step. "Because you didn't arrest me. You didn't want me to call a lawyer. You wanted me to be scared. Quiet. Cooperative." He stood up, taller than either of them, broader than the doorway. "But you picked the wrong black man to intimidate." As they walked him out, the younger agent lingered near the door and mumbled under his breath, "I know who that is, but I can't say anything." Shaq didn't respond, didn't turn. He'd heard it before. The quiet ones always knew. But silence was never what changed anything. He walked back down the hallway, flanked by agents, into the belly of a system that couldn't decide if it feared him or wanted to break him. And still, he kept his head high. They didn't see a philanthropist, or a mentor, or a legend. They saw height, color, control, but they didn't see who he really was. Not yet. The room was white. Not the kind of white that felt clean or peaceful, but the kind that swallowed color, sound, and sense. 4 blank walls, 1 flickering fluorescent light, and a camera in the ceiling corner, its tiny red eye fixed on Shaquille O'Neal like it was waiting for him to blink wrong. He sat still in a metal chair, hands resting lightly on the table. No cuffs now, but that didn't mean freedom. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. The kind of silence that pulsed with the presence of things unsaid, things assumed, things weaponized without words. Shaq breathed slowly, deeply, counting seconds between inhales. Lucille O'Neal's voice echoed in his mind, like it always did when the world started turning mean. "Don't give them your fire, baby. Don't give them your anger. They scared of it already. You give them silence. That's power." He'd learned that early, back in Newark, when cops would pat him down walking home from school just because his backpack looked too full, or when his high school principal told him to tone it down before college scouts came through. Like his laugh, his stride, or his skin might scare the scholarships away. The echoes never left. They just got smarter suits and bigger offices. The door clicked. An agent entered alone this time. A man in his 50s with a polished badge clipped to his belt, and a folder tucked under one arm. He sat across from Shaq, didn't offer a name, just opened the folder and began flipping through pages. No eye contact. "Mr. O'Neal," he said without looking up, "you've been the principal donor for a series of community outreach programs across Florida, Georgia, and Louisiana over the last 5 years. Dozens of them. Everything from coding camps to grocery co-ops. Many with limited federal oversight." Shaq said nothing. Just listened. The agent cleared his throat, tapping a page. "In the last 6 months, 6 of those programs received flag deposits from your foundation's discretionary account. Funds routed through third-party vendors with no visible contracts. Some of those vendors don't exist on state records." Still, Shaq didn't speak. His eyes didn't blink. The agent sighed like he was tired of the game already. "Care to explain that?" Shaq leaned back slightly in his chair. "You got the paperwork. You tell me." The agent frowned. "This isn't a joke, Mr. O'Neal. I'm not laughing." A pause. The agent pressed his palms flat against the table. "We believe these donations may be part of a broader laundering operation, possibly connected to radical activist cells operating under non-profit banners. Shaq's brow twitched, just slightly. Radical activists? Groups engaged in anti-police rhetoric, organizing unpermitted protests, spreading black kids in matching shirts handing out free lunches in the summer. Is a protest to you? The agent finally met his eyes. Intent matters. Shaq stared right back. So does bias. Silence again. The agent sat back in his chair, assessing. Your silence isn't helping you. Shaq shrugged. It's not supposed to help you. The agent opened his mouth like he was about to say something sharp, then stopped. He reached into his folder, pulled out a photo, and slid it across the table. It was grainy, taken from a security camera, showing Shaq shaking hands with a young black man in a hoodie outside a grocery store. This is Devin Case. He's affiliated with a group flagged on our domestic concern list. You donated $10,000 to his program last quarter. Shaq didn't even look at the photo. Kid's 22. Trying to keep his friends out of trouble. Started a night basketball league so they'd have somewhere to go after work. His mama came to my foundation herself. And his league's name is No Peace Till Justice. So, that's a political statement. Shaq finally met his gaze with a steady simmering stare. So's the Pledge of Allegiance. The agent looked annoyed now, tapping his pen against the table. You're walking a fine line here, Mr. O'Neill. You're not untouchable just because you're a celebrity. People make mistakes. They trust the wrong folks. Sometimes they don't realize where the money's going. Sometimes they do. Shaq smiled, just slightly. And sometimes people in rooms like this are fishing for problems instead of fixing real ones. The door opened again. A second agent stepped in quietly, whispering into the first man's ear. Whatever was said made the seated agent frown, even deeper. He nodded once, then stood gathering his papers. You'll remain here while we verify a few things. Do not contact anyone outside this building. Shaq didn't respond, just watched as the man exited without another word. He exhaled slowly. The silence returned, louder than before. Time stretched. The light above buzzed faintly. He could feel his heartbeat in his fingers. Not from fear, from restraint. Every second of stillness was a decision to stay calm when everything inside wanted to roar. He thought again of Newark, of being 12 and pulled off his bike by a cop who thought it looked too expensive. Of Lucille standing in front of him that night, wiping blood from his chin and saying, "You don't get to be angry like them. You get to be smart. You get to be bigger." Shaq had been bigger ever since. Not just in height, not just in fame, but in poise, in patience, in how much he could carry without letting it break him. The door clicked again. This time it was a different agent, nervous, younger, clipboard in hand. He avoided eye contact. Shaq didn't wait for questions. "I want to make a call," he said. The young man blinked. "Sir, you're not formally under arrest, so technically, one call. That's all I'm asking." A pause. The agent hesitated, then nodded and stepped out. Minutes passed. Then the phone was brought in. Basic corded, the kind used in outdated offices and interrogation rooms. The agent placed it in front of him, said nothing, and left. Shaq picked it up, dialed from memory. 3 rings. Then a familiar voice answered, gruff, commanding, with a hint of southern grit. "This is Chief Roland Wexler." Shaq leaned in, his voice calm, but cutting through the silence like thunder on still water. "Roland." "It's Shaq." A pause. Static. Then, "Where the hell are you?" Shaq looked around the white walls, the blinking camera, the door that had locked behind every agent. Clearwater Federal. They've got me sitting here like I'm a threat to the country. On the other end, a sudden shift in energy. "Don't move. Don't say a word to anyone. I'm on my way." Shaq set the phone down. The room didn't feel smaller, but suddenly, the air was different. The silence didn't weigh the same, because now someone was listening. And soon, someone was coming. The corded phone clicked softly into place as Shaq set it down, but the aftershock it sent through the Clearwater Federal complex didn't stop at the table. It reached beyond the white walls, past the sterile air, past the blinking camera that had been recording his every breath. It traveled through the silence like a warning, and it had a name on the other end. Police Chief Roland Wexler. Wexler was in a room 3 miles away, mid-discussion with city officials over budgetary allocations and precinct restructuring, when the call buzzed his private line. His assistant waved a hand toward him, mouthing, "It's him." Wexler snatched the phone, half annoyed. "This better be." The moment Shaq's voice slid through the receiver, calm, low, unmistakable, his entire demeanor flipped. "It's me." Wexler's breath hitched, face hardening. "Where are you?" "Clearwater Fed," Shaq replied, steady as ever. "No charges, no answers, just suspicion and silence." Wexler didn't ask how or why. He didn't need to. He stood up so fast his chair clattered behind him. "Don't say another word to anyone. Don't sign anything. I'm coming myself." Click. That was all Shaq needed to hear. He leaned back in the metal chair again, fingers tapping gently against the table's edge. A calm returned to him. Not because he trusted the system, but because he knew someone who would make it answer was now in motion. Down the corridor, behind double glass walls, two agents stood frozen. They hadn't expected that call to happen, hadn't even expected him to get access to an outside line. But someone junior, someone without full clearance, had let it happen. Now they were scrambling. He called Wexler. One of them muttered, panic rising in his voice. He knows Wexler personally. The lead agent, Brenner, wasn't fazed. Not visibly. He paced slowly, arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Then we buy time. Sir, with respect. Wexler's not someone we can just ignore." Brenner stopped pacing and turned. "You think I don't know that? Wexler's a friend of every city board member from here to Tallahassee. But he doesn't control federal detention policy." He picked up a file, flipped it open, stared at the photo inside. Shaquille O'Neal, smiling in front of a ribbon-cutting ceremony. "Keep him quiet. No more calls. Get internal affairs to scrub any visitor access for the next 6 hours. I want everything that happens in this building from here forward buried, so deep it needs a flashlight." In the coffee room, 2 floors down, a young intern named Eliza Grant, 23, 2 weeks on the job, was scrolling through her feed while stirring sugar into her drink. She hadn't been part of the earlier conversation. She hadn't been in on the directive. But when she passed the detainment wing earlier that morning, she'd done a double take. Not because the man looked familiar, but because he was unforgettable. Now, as her screen loaded a blurry image posted by a passerby outside the federal complex, the caption hit her in the chest. "Just saw Shaq in cuffs at Clearwater Federal. This real WTF is going on." Her coffee cup slipped from her hand and shattered. Upstairs, Shaq was still seated. Still calm, still quiet. But beneath the surface, the currents had begun to shift. A different agent entered now, one with a clipboard and a forced smile. "Mr. O'Neal, we're going to move you to a more comfortable waiting room while we sort through some paperwork. Nothing formal, just procedure." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "You worried your camera might catch something uncomfortable?" The agent paused, unsure if he should laugh. He didn't. "Let's just keep things fluid, sir." Shaq stood slowly, towering. "Fluid," he repeated, letting the word drip with irony. They moved him down a side hall, less white, more mechanical, pipes lining the ceiling, no windows. As they walked, Shaq caught glimpses of hushed voices, phones pressed to ears, people scurrying, not with purpose but with panic. Meanwhile, across town, Wexler's unmarked cruiser was eating up pavement. He'd left the meeting mid-sentence, ignored 3 staffers, and barked at dispatch to clear everything between me and the federal complex, unless someone's bleeding. His face was stone, but inside the anger was molten. He and Shaq went back, not just to mutual respect, but to shared history. Wexler had been one of the only white patrolmen in Newark who didn't treat black boys like suspects. He'd gone to games, bought from local shops. He'd seen Shaq grow from oversized kid to community cornerstone. If there was one thing Wexler didn't tolerate in law enforcement, it was racial pretext disguised as due process. Back at the complex, chaos had started to sprout in places normally built for control. The building's front desk phone rang non-stop. Press inquiries, rumors. Is Shaq in federal custody? Has he been arrested? Why is there no statement? The front desk agent was sweating. They hadn't even written a response script. Upstairs, Agent Brenner was on the phone with someone higher up. His voice low, urgent. "Yes, sir. I understand he's high profile, but we didn't anticipate external optics. No press release yet. We're still reviewing the Foundation's records. Yes, we've secured all digital channels. No calls are going out again." Down the hall, Eliza the intern made a decision that could have ended her career. She walked into the building's secured media center, logged in using her temporary clearance, and flagged the internal memo thread where Shaq's detainment was discussed. She forwarded it quietly to a friend who freelanced for the Clearwater Chronicle. No comment, no name, just one line. He didn't do anything. By the time Shaq was seated in the second room, quieter and windowless, the tone of the staff around him had changed. They weren't talking at him now. They were talking around him. Less eye contact, more hushed tones, tension coiling tighter every minute. Finally, the door cracked open again. This time, a senior administrator, not an agent. Mr. O'Neill, we're going to offer you some refreshments while we work out a few details. Would you like water, juice, coffee? Shaq gave him a slow, tired look. I'll wait. 10 miles per hour over the limit, Wexler's cruiser screeched around the complex's main entrance. He didn't park. He left the car running and stormed through the front doors. His badge was out before the receptionist could speak. I need access to every detainment record from the last 4 hours, he barked. The woman stammered. Sir, this is a federal... I don't give a damn what jurisdiction you think this is. You've got Shaquille O'Neal in your custody, and every second he's here without a charge is a second closer to a national scandal. Now either put him on the phone, or put me in the room. Behind the glass, someone watching from surveillance whispered to another agent. He just walked in, and he's not leaving without him. The agent swallowed hard, because the call had gone through, and everything was about to change. Inside the Clearwater Federal Complex, the walls weren't just white. They were complicit. Documents slid silently across polished desks. Decisions made in corners of conference rooms were dressed up in bureaucratic language and handed to junior staff as protocol. But behind that language, beneath the buzzwords and acronyms, was something far older and more dangerous than procedure: prejudice with a clipboard. Agent Milo Brenner didn't see himself as racist. That's how it always started. He saw himself as a realist. Someone willing to go beyond the noise. He'd made his career studying behavioral patterns and cultivating early detection models for potential criminal activity in American cities. His latest project, a pilot initiative, unofficially called the Charity Laundering Probe, was built around one dangerous presumption: that public-facing black leaders were increasingly laundering money under the guise of nonprofit reform. Not gangs, not cartels, urban influencers. And Shaquille O'Neal, by Brenner's logic, was the perfect test subject. High net worth, deep community ties, media darling, untouchable, until now. A cluster of agents stood in Brenner's office, watching as he presented a slick slideshow on a mounted screen. The image on display was Shaq in front of a youth center, arms outstretched, kids all around him. Gentlemen, Brenner said, tapping his tablet, this is the new threat vector. Not drive-bys, not drug rings, narrative warfare, community credibility being used to undermine federal trust structures. You take a man like O'Neill, you pump millions into areas under surveillance, and suddenly we've got organized insulation, protected networks using moral camouflage. One of the agents raised a hand, hesitant. But it's Shaq. Brenner didn't blink.
That's why it works.
The system never expects the familiar face. The hero. That's why we test the model here. High optics, high risk. But if it holds, we roll it nationally. At that exact moment, down on the first floor, Police Chief Roland Wexler was pushing his way through the security checkpoint, like a force of nature. The guards tried to stall, offering him sign-in sheets and procedural warnings. Wexler wasn't having it. Don't quote me protocol, he snapped. You've got a man in there illegally detained, a man who's done more for this town than any of you hiding behind suits and wires. Now take me to whoever made that decision, or I swear I will burn your internal report tree down one branch at a time. Upstairs, Brenner was notified. Wexler's here, demanding a sit-down. For a moment, Brenner said nothing. Then he clicked the projector off and sighed. Bring him in. 2 minutes later, Wexler stepped into the room like a man who knew he'd walked into a rigged game and still intended to flip the table. He didn't shake hands, didn't sit. You racially profiled a national icon, he said without preamble, voice coiled with fury. Do you have any idea what's coming? Brenner leaned back, measured. Chief Wexler, I assure you, Mr. O'Neill's detainment falls within federal investigatory jurisdiction. Don't throw red tape at me, Brenner. Wexler cut in. He was pulled with no cause, no charges, and if you say voluntary hold one more time, I swear I'll put a civil rights task force on this building by morning. The agents in the room froze. No one spoke. The tension was high enough to split bone. Brenner exhaled slowly. rising from his chair. What's your stake in this, Wexler? Old friends with the celebrity? Or are you worried he's going to make a few too many speeches and shake up your next election cycle? Wexler's lip curled. My stake is justice. Yours is control. You're not targeting crime. You're targeting narrative. You're afraid of black leaders who aren't scared of you anymore. You're overstepping, Brenner replied. And you're under fire. The room practically buzzed. But Brenner wasn't finished. He stepped to a secure file cabinet, pulled a red folder, and slid it across the table toward Wexler. National Interest Classification, he said. We've designated Mr. O'Neill's case under emergent review due to abnormal financial routing patterns and his influence across multiple potentially radicalized youth initiatives. This buys us 72 hours of discretionary detainment. No outside legal required. No press briefings. Wexler opened the folder. Inside were a string of doctored charts, intentionally vague terms like potential ideological convergence and monitored group association. The paper was thick with innuendo and thin on substance. You think using enough buzzwords makes this legal? Wexler asked. I think this keeps us ahead of a dangerous curve. Wexler's hand clenched into a fist, then relaxed. He stared at Brenner. Cold. You're not running an investigation. You're running a simulation. You're testing what happens when you treat a black philanthropist like a criminal and wait to see if anyone notices. The door behind them opened suddenly. A staffer poked his head in, flustered. Sir, something's happening online. What kind of something? Brenner asked. A video's going viral. Some girl named Eliza posted footage from inside the building. It's Shaq, in the holding room. She tagged half the media industry. It's trending. Brenner's composure cracked. Just for a moment. Shut it down, he snapped. It's too late, the staffer said. It's already hit national press. ESPN's running a segment in 20 minutes. Wexler's smile came slow and sharp. So much for the simulation. Brenner turned toward the window. Outside, the afternoon light had dimmed slightly. Clouds rolling in. A shift was coming. One he couldn't control with folders or fabricated data. Shaq was no longer just a subject. He was a spotlight, and that light was now pointed at everything Brenner wanted to hide. Still, Brenner wasn't finished. We're holding him, he said, jaw tight, for 72 hours. Under full federal authority. Wexler shook his head. You do that, and this building won't be under investigation. It'll be under siege. You're not fighting crime, Brenner. You're picking battles with the future, and the future always wins. Brenner said nothing. Wexler turned and walked out. Outside, his phone buzzed again. Another reporter. Another activist. Another call for justice. Inside, Shaq sat in a locked room, but the walls were starting to shake. They didn't know who they were messing with, but they knew exactly what color he was. Wexler's boots hit the floor like hammers as he stormed through the corridors of the Clearwater Federal Complex, his badge swinging wildly with every step. He wasn't just angry now. He was lit from within, a fuse crawling towards something explosive. The smell of bureaucracy clung to the walls. Bleach, stale coffee, ink toner, but beneath it all, Wexler smelled something worse. Rot. He barreled into the administrative records room, flashing his credentials at the clerk before the man could ask a question. I want full access to every investigatory flag, forecast profile, and incident report connected to Shaquille O'Neal, or any affiliate nonprofit over the last 12 months. The clerk stammered. That's classified under the Joint Urban Forecasting Initiative. I can't. Wexler cut him off. Then unclassify it, or I'll have the press in this room with cameras before you can say audit. The files came. Paper, digital, cross-indexed, tagged with red labels and coded language that read like strategy memos dressed in academic jargon. Wexler flipped through them one by one. It didn't take long for the pattern to emerge. Shaq's Heart Point Youth Center had been flagged 6 months ago, not because of a complaint, not because of a funding error, but because it had suddenly seen an increase in non-traditional traffic patterns. More teens, more community events, fewer police calls. It was profiled by a predictive algorithm designed by the Bureau to scan for unusual community autonomy in high-risk neighborhoods. The justification? Indicators of reduced dependency on official law enforcement frameworks. Translation: they were doing too well without cops. Wexler's jaw locked tight. He dug deeper. Every program Shaq funded in low-income black communities had been categorized under a secret evaluation protocol, one aimed at identifying social capital hubs with potential counter-narrative influence, and next to each flagged entry was a chilling acronym: acceptable public sacrifice. It was part of a risk model, a quietly circulated strategy memo that floated the idea of sacrificing high-profile black figures to preemptively discredit grassroots movements. Strategic public accountability events, it read. Calibrate response metrics for plausible deniability. Wexler's hands clenched around the folder edges. The paper crumpled beneath his grip. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Shaq sat in a holding room that looked more like a neglected nurse's office than a detention space. He wasn't alone now. In the corner, curled up on a stiff bench under flickering lights, was a teen with anxious eyes and skin too young to be so tired. "Name's Tristan," he said when Shaq offered a nod. "They picked me up for loitering. I was on my own porch." Shaq tilted his head. "Your porch?" "Yeah. I live there. My mom got the lease papers, if they'd bother checking." Shaq leaned forward slightly.
How old are you?
17. I got a part-time job at the rec center. Was just sitting outside waiting for my shift. Cops said I looked like someone who'd been reported for trespassing. Shaq exhaled through his nose, slow and heavy. "You know what that is?" Tristan looked up.
What?
"Code." Tristan frowned. "For what?" "For black boy in the wrong place, and too proud to bow his head." Tristan nodded. He'd heard it before. Not those exact words, but in the way people clutched their purses near him in stores, in the way officers looked through him instead of at him, in the way jobs got quiet when he said what neighborhood he lived in. Shaq's voice dropped lower. "Don't let them take your head down, not even when they tell you to." Tristan didn't respond, but he sat up straighter. Shaq reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded card. Somehow they hadn't taken it when they processed him. On it was a number. The director of the Heartpoint mentorship program. "You call her. Tell her you're ready to come by next week. You don't owe them a record. You owe yourself a future." Tristan looked at the card like it was a map to somewhere he hadn't believed existed. Back upstairs, Wexler threw open the door to the conference room, where Agent Brenner stood, already surrounded by a few shaken subordinates scrolling through live news updates. The Shaq story had blown up. A grainy video of him sitting calmly in the holding room had gone viral. Headlines were everywhere. Philanthropist detained without cause. Shaq held by feds in secret probe. When giving back gets you shackled. Wexler didn't wait to be acknowledged. He slapped the folder down on the table so hard it echoed. "You flagged his center because it made too much of a difference," he growled. "You labeled him a social threat because his programs gave kids hope you couldn't track. And now I've got memos calling him an acceptable sacrifice." Brenner didn't look up. Those models were theoretical. Wexler's voice was ice. "So was slavery, until you put it into practice." Brenner looked like he wanted to argue, but the tide was shifting fast. Internal Affairs was already on the line. DOJ oversight had pinged the local office. Too many eyes now. Too many questions. Wexler leaned in, quiet but lethal. "You built a system that punishes success because of where it comes from. You designed an algorithm that sees uplift in black communities as a statistical anomaly. And now you're caught treating one of the most respected men in America like a threat because he dared to build something you didn't own." Brenner finally spoke. "You think influence doesn't need watching? I think people like you don't know the difference between watching and hunting." Downstairs, Shaq heard the shift. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But in the way the guards avoided his eyes, in the way the air buzzed with urgency, in the way Tristan was suddenly told he'd be reviewed for release, the atmosphere had changed. The walls hadn't collapsed, but they were cracking. Wexler picked up the folder one last time, held it in front of Brenner. "You buried justice under policy, and now I'm going to dig it out one badge at a time." Outside, storm clouds had rolled in. But inside, the truth was starting to pour. By sunrise, the Bureau had a full-blown crisis on its hands, and there wasn't a whiteboard big enough to diagram the damage. News anchors rotated Shaquille O'Neal's mugless booking photo across national screens. Pundits debated federal overreach, and a firestorm erupted on social media that no algorithm could contain. Free Shaq wasn't just trending, it was roaring through timelines like a freight train with no brakes. Shaq's quiet strength in the holding room, caught on a leaked video, had gone viral overnight. He sat there unmoved, calm, cuffed to a metal chair, the fluorescent light casting a glow over a face the world had grown up with. There was no shouting, no resistance, just dignity under pressure. And that image burned, LeBron James was one of the first to post. They held Shaq with no charge. This is why we can't be silent anymore. Free Shaq. Then Oprah. Then Ava DuVernay. Then Dwayne Johnson. Within hours, journalists descended on Clearwater. Protesters camped outside the federal complex gates. People weren't just angry, they were heartbroken, disillusioned. If Shaquille O'Neal, a man whose life had been defined by generosity, love and visibility, could be profiled and disappeared into silence, what did that mean for those without a name? Upstairs in the Bureau's command suite, Agent Brenner stood in front of a digital board, flickering with heat maps and keyword surges. PR specialists, legal analysts, and strategy officers hovered like bees in a kicked hive. A statement had been drafted and deleted 5 times. "Do we admit mishandling?" someone asked. "We didn't mishandle anything," Brenner snapped. "We followed procedure." A junior agent looked up from his tablet. "Sir, we've got CNN running the term racial profiling initiative on a loop. It's not going away." Brenner's voice cut through the panic. "If we back down now, we admit guilt. If we release him too soon, we validate the narrative. We hold the line." But the line was already buckling. Down the hall, Wexler was on a secure call with state oversight, pacing like a lion in a cage. He had the files, the algorithm logs, the memos, all of it printed and documented in a folder now labeled Operation Mirror. He had what he needed to blow this thing open, but what he didn't have yet was permission. "You leak this wrong," the voice on the other end warned, "and your entire department disappears into restructuring. They'll strip it down and pin the blame on you for compromising federal relationships." Wexler stopped. "So I'm supposed to sit here and let a good man rot in a cell while the Bureau experiments with civil rights violations? You think this ends with Shaq?" the voice said. "This was never about him. This is about precedent, about conditioning the public to accept intervention under any label we choose." Wexler's jaw clenched. "You sound like you've rehearsed that." There was a pause. "Just understand, this wasn't just about Shaq. This was a message. You play your cards wrong, and you'll be next." Wexler hung up without another word. Back in the detention wing, Shaq hadn't moved much, but he felt the pressure in the air shift again. A guard offered him water now. Someone else, an unfamiliar man in a blazer, came to check in, asking if he needed a more comfortable seat. It wasn't kindness, it was optics panic disguised as courtesy. He didn't smile, didn't ask questions. The system was nervous, and nervous systems made mistakes. Down the hall, Agent Brenner stared out a glass window as the first group of protesters began chaining signs to the fence. One read, "If Shaq ain't safe, none of us are." Another, "Truth is louder than your silence." Brenner turned back to his team. "I want counter-intel briefs on everyone posting with that hashtag. Find out if any of them are tied to known subversive groups. We don't get swallowed by a moment. We control it." A woman from legal raised her voice, careful but firm. "Sir, we're already being investigated by DOJ ethics. We can't run domestic surveillance without cause." Brenner looked her dead in the eye. "'Cause is whatever we say it is. We're not losing this narrative." But he already had. In a downtown hotel suite, a well-dressed stranger with a Bluetooth earpiece and a face no one could quite remember knocked on Wexler's private door. Wexler opened it with caution. The man didn't introduce himself. He stepped inside, took a slow look around, then set a slim black envelope on the table. "What is this?" Wexler asked. "Insurance," the man replied. "You're not the only one with files. The Bureau has contingency plans for every political outburst, including yours." "I don't respond to threats." "It's not a threat," the man said calmly. "It's a forecast. Play this smart, Chief. Make your noise quietly. Let the dust settle. You'll keep your badge. He'll get out eventually, and the system will go on." Wexler studied the man for a long second. "The system's cracked." The man gave a faint smile. "Cracked doesn't mean broken. It just means the water hasn't drowned us yet." Back at the complex, Shaq stared at the clock. He'd stopped asking for justice hours ago. Now he was waiting for someone to decide whether or not he deserved it. And outside, the world waited with him. The flash drive arrived in Wexler's inbox at 2:03 a.m. No sender, no message, just a subject line that read, "Truth doesn't need clearance." It was small, black, and unbranded, the kind of thing you could overlook if you weren't hunting for ghosts. But Wexler wasn't just hunting, he was cornered, and someone on the inside knew it. He plugged the drive into his encrypted laptop in his hotel room, hands steady but pulse ticking like a timer. It opened a hidden folder labeled Mirror Seeds, and within it a single file, a data model annotated with flagged terms, source citations, and redacted internal memos. At the top of the document, a chilling title, Urban Stabilization Forecast System V2.7, Internal Behavioral Risk Index. Wexler scrolled through page after page of what the Bureau had built, a pre-crime prediction algorithm, designed to monitor what it labeled community volatility vectors. It didn't use race as a category, not overtly. It pulled data from neighborhood crime stats, school dropout rates, financial assistance programs, and arrest records. And every one of those data points was already soaked in bias before the first line of code had ever been written. Wexler's breath caught in his chest when he hit a color-coded heatum. Every high-risk zone the program targeted was a black neighborhood. Every nonprofit flagged as suspicious had a black founder. Every arrest connected to the program, going back 18 months, involved a person of color. No outliers, no exceptions. The algorithm didn't lie. But what it had been taught to see as criminal was the very existence of black leadership, success, and independence. And Shaquille O'Neal had been its crown jewel. Wexler's fists clenched. This wasn't policing. This was data-driven discrimination, dressed in machine language. He didn't need a court ruling to know what this was. It was racism, with a loading bar. He immediately began crafting a press release, short, sharp, and devastating. Not a leak, but a declaration. He'd name the program, call out the arrests, expose the systemic target on black-led community initiatives, and demand the immediate dismantling of the forecast system. The release would go to 5 major outlets at once. His badge number would be on the bottom. Let them come for him. But as he typed, his secure phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He answered. A voice, calm and collected, said, "Chief Wexler, if you hit send on that document, you won't just lose your badge, you'll start a fire that burns your entire career off the map." "Good," Wexler replied. "Some forests need to burn before they regrow." "You think you're the first to try this?" the voice said. "We've buried stronger men with better evidence. Walk away from this, and you can live to fight the next one." "I'm done walking," Wexler growled, then hung up. Meanwhile, back in the holding room, Shaq was still sitting with Tristan, the 17-year-old who'd been picked up for loitering outside his own apartment. Shaq could tell the boy hadn't slept. His legs jittered under the bench. He rubbed his arms like the room was colder than it was. Shaq leaned forward, voice soft but unshakable. "You ever hear what my mama used to say when the world tried to shrink us?" Tristan shook his head. She'd say, "They can put you in a box, but they can't decide what's inside it." Tristan cracked a faint smile. "She sounds tough." "She was," Shaq said, glancing up at the ceiling. "Still is." Tristan hesitated, then asked, "You think I'm getting out of here?" Shaq nodded. "You are. You're gonna walk out of here with your head higher than when you came in. Because the people watching, they see you now. They see what they're doing to us. And the only thing more dangerous than a system that targets us is a country that's finally paying attention." Just then, a guard came to the door. He didn't enter, just lingered like he wasn't sure what to do next. He looked between Shaq and Tristan, then at his radio, then turned and walked off. Cracks everywhere. In the Bureau's media department, panic was setting in. A draft press release had been blocked by internal security protocols. Wexler's credentials had tripped a flag, and now 3 people in the legal team were debating whether to intercept the message or bury the entire situation under ongoing federal review. Brenner stormed in, red in the face. Who authorized that file to be open on a non-Bureau device? No one answered. No one had to. It had already spread. The data dump wasn't a leak. It was a detonation. And even as they tried to contain it, too many copies had been made. Too many allies had quietly passed it forward. And in a building built on secrecy, the truth was now louder than every locked door inside it. Wexler stood in front of a mirror in his hotel bathroom, tie loosened, face grim. The press release was ready. Finalized. Waiting. He stared at himself, at the man who'd once believed the badge meant something unshakable. And then he clicked send. The message went out. To CNN, to The Guardian, to 3 national black press outlets, and to Shaq's personal publicist, whose inbox had already been bursting with inquiries. The headline was bold, unflinching. The FBI algorithm used to target black nonprofits. Internal whistleblower reveals. Brenner's face drained when the alert hit his screen. There was no time to stop it now. Back in the detention wing, the door to Shaq's holding room swung open. "You're being released," a senior official said, voice clipped. "Pending formal review." Shaq stood slowly. No smile, no celebration, just presence. He turned to Tristan and pressed the contact card back into the boy's hand. "Keep it close. I'll see you again, but next time, not in here." Then he walked out of the room, through the hallway, past the stairs, through the storm. The code had spoken. But this time, so had justice. The sun hadn't yet cleared the clouds when the truth broke open like a fault line beneath the nation. Wexler's leak, raw, deliberate, and without bureaucratic varnish, hit the networks at dawn and rolled like a thunderclap across cable, radio, and phones. Every major outlet ran the story with urgency. FBI algorithm racially profiles black community programs. The files weren't redacted. The names weren't blurred. The system's design, its inner language, and its intended targets were laid bare for the world to see. Within hours, Clearwater Federal Complex became ground zero for a storm that hadn't touched down yet, but was already tearing at the roof. Civil rights attorneys from the ACLU, India ECP, and Justice Now arrived with files, subpoenas, and press teams. Protesters lined the perimeter chanting for transparency, for justice, and for the end of the quiet policies that treated black empowerment like a threat. The bureaus scrambled behind glass. Inside, the chain of command was buckling. Internal Affairs launched a formal review. The Department of Justice, under mounting political pressure, issued a rare midday statement promising an immediate investigation into discriminatory surveillance practices within domestic intelligence operations. The director of the FBI, usually a figure of restrained neutrality, was forced to make a public appearance, stiff in front of cameras, acknowledging grave concerns regarding the conduct of predictive law enforcement systems. But they didn't mention Shaquille O'Neal by name. Not once. His release was signed quietly, almost ashamedly, in a corner office under the header of Discretionary Administrative Reassessment. No charges filed. No public statement. Just a plain white envelope handed to a mid-level agent with instructions to escort the subject off-site and avoid media exposure at all costs. But Shaq didn't leave through the back. He stood in the center of the detention corridor, eyes fixed ahead, presence bigger than the walls themselves. A junior agent tried to guide him to a side door. Shaq didn't move. "I'm going out the front," he said, voice low and calm. "Sir, we've been advised." Shaq looked at him, just once, and the words evaporated. Outside, the moment he pushed open the main glass doors, the crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in electric silence. Cameras rose, microphones reached forward like flowers straining for sun. Journalists fell over themselves to get a word, but Shaq didn't rush. He stepped down the concrete stairs, every movement slow, grounded, like a man carrying something heavier than chains. He stopped at the bottom, turned, faced the sea of flashing lenses and waiting mouths. The buzz began to rise, everyone asking questions at once. He raised a single hand. The crowd went still. Shaq looked out, eyes scanning the people who had waited for hours, who had spoken his name across screens and platforms, not because he was famous, but because he was familiar. He was someone they'd grown up watching, someone they trusted, and now, someone who had been dragged through the system they feared. "I ain't here to talk about just me," he began, voice deep, warm, unshaken. "I'm here for the ones who never got this chance." The crowd quieted, listening. "See, I got lucky. I got people. I got visibility. I got a name that rings bells when it hits the walls of a place like this. But what about the brothers who didn't? What about the kids they picked up and disappeared because they didn't smile enough? Because their hoodies were too dark or their voices too deep?" He paused, eyes narrowing. "This ain't about a celebrity being inconvenienced. This is about a system designed to treat black hope like it's a threat, and black success like it's a scam. They didn't pull me in because I did something wrong. They pulled me in to test whether they could get away with it." He glanced toward the complex behind him. "They thought I'd walk out of here quiet. They thought I'd be grateful just to leave. But understand this, freedom without accountability ain't justice, and silence ain't peace." Reporters scribbled furiously. Some dropped their pens entirely, just listening. They built a machine to predict crime. Shaq continued. "But the only thing that machine saw was color. The only pattern it learned was skin. And you know what that tells me? The code wasn't broken. It was written that way." A woman in the front row nodded, tears on her cheeks. "I walked out of here," he said, hand over his chest. But I'm carrying every brother who didn't. Every name that ain't trending. Every boy who didn't get to make a phone call. Every mother who still don't know why her baby didn't come home. The crowd was still breathless. This country's got work to do, he said. Not just in policy, but in truth. Not just in what it punishes, but in what it protects. And if it takes dragging me through this to make that work start, then so be it. He looked around once more, then nodded.
We done letting them write our story without us.
And just like that he turned and walked away. No applause. No chaos. Just silence. A silence full of meaning. The kind that follows thunder. Inside the complex, Agent Brenner watched the footage unfold on a security feed. He didn't say anything. His career was already bleeding out in the corner of a file cabinet marked for audit. Wexler, from across the street, watched, two shoulders finally lowered. Eyes clear. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. The foundation had cracked. And all it took was the truth. The world didn't change overnight. But the phone call Shaq made inside that cold interrogation room had set something into motion that couldn't be undone, contained or buried under red tape. What began as a request for justice had bloomed into a national reckoning. Shaquille O'Neal hadn't asked for a revolution. But the moment he dialed Chief Roland Wexler, the wheels began to turn, and by the time they stopped, America wasn't the same. 3 weeks after his release, Shaq stood in front of a crowd gathered at the newly dedicated Clear Fund headquarters, in the heart of Clearwater. Clearwater Legacy, for Equality and Reform, was more than a program. It was a response, a promise, a living, breathing rebuttal to every profile, every bias-coded algorithm, and every handcuffed assumption. Where an old municipal records building once stood, now rose a modern glass-fronted center bustling with counselors, coders, community leaders, and students. Murals covered the exterior walls, depicting scenes of protest, resilience, Black excellence. On one side, a giant portrait of a young boy with his fist in the air, framed by the words, "Don't just fix the system, replace it." Inside, on a second-floor balcony, Shaq stood with Tristan, the 17-year-old boy who had once sat across from him in a holding room, afraid and unsure if he'd ever see sunlight without a record attached to his name. "You still sure about coding?" Shaq asked, arm around the boy's shoulder. Tristan grinned.
Yeah.
"I didn't think it'd be my thing. But turns out breaking systems apart is kinda my vibe." "You're gonna build some new ones," Shaq said. "Ones that ain't built to break you first." Tristan had been awarded the first full scholarship under the CLEAR initiative, a joint internship and educational pipeline pairing minority youth with mentors in tech, law, social reform, and business. He wasn't just learning computers, he was learning how to fight back in the language they couldn't twist. Meanwhile, in Washington, Agent Milo Brenner sat in a closed-door ethics hearing, his suit sharp, but his voice tight. The Bureau had no choice but to open a formal investigation after the data leak exposed the urban stabilization forecast system and its racially skewed framework. The very tool Brenner had championed was now the centerpiece of federal embarrassment. His face had become the symbol of a system too proud to admit it had been poisoning its own waters. The program was suspended indefinitely. A bipartisan committee introduced new legislation requiring transparency in algorithmic surveillance. Civil liberties groups pushed for criminal consequences, not just policy reviews. Back in Clearwater, the community held its breath to see if it would all stick. And Shaq? He didn't wait for permission to lead. He toured city after city, Baltimore, Jackson, Detroit, pitching CLEAR to local governments, businesses, and private donors. He wasn't selling pity. He was investing in legacy. His message was consistent. If the system won't protect us, we'll build our own that does. Media followed him everywhere now. But his tone never shifted. He didn't grandstand. He didn't gloat. He gave press conferences that sounded more like sermons, and town halls that felt like classrooms. He wasn't just a face on a billboard. He was an engine, rolling over decades of suppression with the force of compassion made unstoppable. In one particularly viral moment, a journalist asked if he ever felt scared calling out institutions so powerful. Shaq answered, "They had me in a chair with no charges, no lawyer, no voice, and I still walked out. That ain't power, that's fear. They feared what happens when we start speaking up, and don't shut up." The crowd roared. The message echoed. Weeks passed, then months. And while not every headline stayed focused, the roots planted that day in Clearwater were already spreading. Inside the Heartpoint Youth Center, now refurbished and partially funded by Clear. The gym echoed with sneakers squeaking on polished floors and kids shouting about who fouled who. Shaq stood at the free throw line, pretending to miss a shot just to give them hope. "You gonna let a retiree school yell again?" he teased, as 3 boys tried to box him out and failed miserably. From the sidelines, a girl raised her phone and recorded the moment. "Big Shaq back on the court," she shouted. "Somebody tell the league." Everyone laughed. The tension that had once gripped this place, suspicion, fear, resignation, was replaced by energy, possibility. Lucille O'Neill sat in the bleachers, quiet, holding a styrofoam cup of sweet tea. She watched her son not as a celebrity, but as the boy who once came home with scraped knees and big dreams. She didn't need him to say anything. She could feel what he'd carried, what he'd shed, what he was still building. And in that quiet moment, as Shaq spun around laughing with the kids, their joy rolling across the hardwood like sunlight, her voice filled his head like music. "You turned pain into power, baby."
He didn't cry.
But he looked up and smiled. If this story hit something real in you, don't scroll past it. Carry it forward. Talk about it. Share it in rooms that stay too quiet. Challenge systems that treat justice like a privilege, because the next time they target someone without a name, your voice might be the only thing that gets them heard.